I have made a solemn vow to never attend another bachelor party. I have my reasons for this decision, which I will explain in detail. The last bachelor party I attended resulted in my engaging in sexual intercourse with an athlete and being unfaithful to my husband. I recognize that this was a colossal mistake, and I hope that things will not take a turn for the worse than they already have. I had always heard that bachelor parties can be wild and unpredictable, but I had never envisioned myself being on the receiving end of such wild activities. I had not considered participating in any of those wild antics. It is therefore particularly distressing to realize that I allowed my guard to be lowered and that I have committed an unforgivable act. I am genuinely frightened, gentlemen, and so terrified that I am unsure of what to do. I am scared that should my husband discover the truth, I will undoubtedly face severe consequences. I am certain that he will not simply overlook the events of that night. I am overwhelmed with fear, and there are numerous reasons for my apprehension. My name is Elena, and I am a 31-year-old woman. I am a 31-year-old woman. I am an experienced choreographer and dancer. I have dedicated nearly a decade of my life to this field, a passion I developed at a very young age. My husband is a journalist. For reasons of privacy, I will not reveal his real name. I will simply refer to him as DNE, which is his initials. He is 32 years old and has an unwavering passion for journalism. It might seem like an odd match, a dancer and a journalist. I sometimes ponder how we ended up getting married despite our vastly different professions. My husband and I have been married for 3 years now, and we have not yet started a family. We have not yet established a family unit, as we are frequently required to relocate for professional commitments. We have chosen to delay childbearing until we are certain that we can dedicate sufficient time to raising them. My work as a dancer and choreographer frequently requires travel, which led me to Chicago for a wedding. The wedding was for a client, and I was unfamiliar with the local area. In fact, the client was an old friend of mine. It was this particular wedding that prompted my current state of narrow-mindedness. In retrospect, I believe I should have declined the assignment and not attended the wedding. However, I recognize that such actions cannot alter the past. When I initially accepted the job, I discussed it with my husband, as I have consistently sought his approval before undertaking work-related travel. Similarly, he seeks my consent before embarking on work-related travel. I must apologize for using the term a gig. It is simply a quirky habit of mine. I kindly request that you do not judge me. When I discussed the matter with Dane, he had no objections. Traveling for work has always been a regular part of my life, and he never voiced any complaints. I believe he is usually okay with it because he frequently travels for work as well. Perhaps he carries a sense of guilt and prefers that we maintain a mutual understanding. It is important to note that neither Dane nor I are home on a regular basis. Our schedules and work commitments make it challenging for us to spend time together at home. This is precisely why we decided to postpone having children. As you can probably imagine, if we were to have kids right now, we would probably be the world's most absent parents, unless we hired a nanny. Now, where was I? Oh yes, Dane. He granted me permission to travel to Chicago for my job, aware that he would also be away on business. Consequently, we both left home for our respective commitments. Upon my arrival in Chicago, I was met with an extensive workload as a choreographer. I often find one of the most challenging tasks is choreographing for weddings. Undoubtedly, it is one of the more demanding aspects of my profession. The necessity to earn a living. My role was to instruct the couple as well as their bridesmaids and groomsmen in additional choreography to enhance their wedding entrance, akin to the trendy entrances seen online. Teaching dance to individuals with little to no prior dance experience or rhythm is a formidable task. It proved to be quite a daunting endeavor, especially considering that I had only a 2. From the moment I arrived in Chicago, I was tasked with ensuring that all participants performed their respective roles flawlessly. At times, the lack of cooperation from the participants led me to consider abandoning the endeavor. I am not exaggerating when I say that I was on the brink of a mental breakdown. Such challenges are not unfamiliar in my line of work. Whenever they arise, I like to have engaged in lengthy discussions with my husband to mitigate the stress associated with the aforementioned trip. I frequently sought the emotional support of Dan. However, he eventually informed me that he was preoccupied with work, which compelled me to cope with this situation independently. the rationale behind my decision to attend the event remains unclear. In regard to the specific bachelor party, I had declined the majority of such invitations while on work trips. The few instances in which I did attend such parties were either for close friends or relatives. In this case, however, the couple in question were friends from my college days. When they invited me to their bachelor party, I immediately declined without needing time to consider. My initial refusal was partly due to exhaustion from extensive dancing and teaching. However, the couple persisted and refused to accept my initial refusal. They continued to pester me, urging me to attend their joint bachelor party. In retrospect, I regret not maintaining my initial response when upon initial inquiry, I was of the conviction that had I remained steadfast in my refusal, the eventual outcome might have been dissimilar. Upon my eventual attendance at the bachelor party, it became immediately evident that the event diverged from the conventional norms associated with a bachelor party. Instead of celebrating separately, this couple opted for a joint event, which proved to be an exceptional and boisterous gathering. I was instantly overcome with a sense of I should have declined their invitation outright. The venue was filled with alcoholic beverages and people were dancing with abandon, seemingly without regard for the potential consequences. Those who have attended a bachelor party before can likely relate to the sheer exuberance I observed. It is noteworthy how some couples choose to celebrate in such an exuberant manner. In this case, the couple in question did not limit themselves to conventional forms of celebration, instead embracing a more uninhibited and exuberant approach to revelry. I found myself to be a rather incongruous presence in this context and thus requested an early departure. However, I had arrived at the club in the couple's vehicle and thus was unable to secure alternative transportation. My familiarity with Chicago was limited, as I had not visited the city with any regularity initially. I considered requesting the couple to arrange a taxi for me and provide clear instructions on where to drop me off. However, upon reflection, I refrained from doing so, deeming it inconsiderate to interrupt their enjoyment and not wanting to impose or find myself in an awkward situation. I was also apprehensive about being driven to an unfamiliar location by a taxi driver in a city I was not well acquainted with. Additionally, I am inclined to overanalyze every detail and read too much into things. I can easily become overly suspicious about even the most minor matters. I will provide a plethora of reasons to validate my concerns on this particular occasion. I made the decision to remain at the party and do my best to remained at the party until the couple was ready to leave. I had a strong suspicion that their departure would not occur prematurely, as they did not display any inclination to leave the party early. I spent my time exploring the venue and sampling the various dishes on display. I have an unwavering passion for good food and never miss an opportunity to indulge. I proceeded to sample various culinary delights at my leisure. At that moment, a gentleman caught my attention. He signaled for me to join him by waving. Many might consider this gesture to be somewhat cliché. However, I was pleasantly surprised that any man had the audacity to make such a move. I previously held the belief that I had an invisible sign on my forehead which deterred potential suitors. I was not anticipating any interest from men given my status as a married woman. However, this proved to be an erroneous assumption. It appeared that my marital status was not immediately apparent to everyone. To clarify, I do not wear a wedding ring. This is because I misplaced it within 6 months of my marriage. My husband experienced a similar fate, misplacing his wedding ring. Additionally, I believe we are not the only couple in our situation, given the demanding and strenuous nature of our professions. We both recognized that maintaining something as simple as a ring was virtually impossible during the initial weeks following our wedding. I struggled to keep it on while dancing. There were moments when it slipped off my finger, and other times when it got. I made a sincere effort to search for it whenever it was lost, but as time passed, I ceased trying to locate it, recognizing that it would likely be permanently misplaced. My husband, on the other hand, misplaced his ring while waiting in line with his colleagues for a crucial interview. The lengths to which journalists will go to secure interviews, thrusting microphones in the faces of their subjects, can be quite chaotic. The situation was rather chaotic, and my husband often shares this with me, which has always piqued my curiosity. I apologize for the digression. I simply wanted to ensure that everyone understood that I did not intentionally misplace my wedding ring or leave it behind at the hotel. Now, returning to the narrative, when the gentleman waved and motioned for me to join him, I attempted to act as though I hadn't. I observed his gesture and initially assumed that he might be intoxicated and would eventually lose interest and move on when he grew tired. However, as it transpired, I was mistaken, and he persisted. He approached me with a broad, toothed smile. I am disclosing this information in the hope that it will be taken at face value. At the time, I genuinely believed that he was inebriated, but later I discovered that he was completely sober, contrary to my expectations. He did not leave as I had anticipated. Instead, he introduced himself. I will not divulge his real name to protect his privacy. For the sake of this account, we will refer to him as Brandon. Brandon inquired about my name, and I provided it without hesitation. I must admit that I found Brandon rather attractive when he approached me. I was particularly struck by his exceptionally white teeth, which appeared as if they had been meticulously cared for, possibly with expensive dental work. He also sported a diamond earring in one ear, or at least what appeared to be a diamond earring. I was unable to ascertain the authenticity of his claim. He struck me as one of those individuals who invest a significant amount of money in their attire and overall appearance. I was unable to comprehend why he had suddenly taken an interest in striking up a conversation with me. However, I did not rebuff his advances. By the time Brandon approached me, I had already consumed 1 or 2 drinks, leaving me feeling somewhat tipsy and in high spirits. I was unable to identify the concoction the bartender had prepared for me. I took a sip, however, despite the potent punch, I was curious about the drink's appearance. I wanted to know more. Brandon initiated the conversation, starting with casual chit-chat. He inquired about my connection to the couple. I mentioned that I was their choreographer. In return, I asked about his relationship with the couple. He disclosed that he was a distant cousin of the groom. Our dialogue transitioned seamlessly into light-hearted conversation. Despite my inability to recall the specific subjects that elicited our mirth, the party progressed in a progressively more exuberant manner, with individuals engaged in dancing, overindulgence, and a multitude of activities within the club. I had previously conceived of a bachelor party as a relatively tame affair. However, I was astonished to witness the extent of the festivities. I even had the opportunity to observe the couple engaging in a series of bold actions with others. I was taken aback when Brandon pulled me onto the dance floor. It is important to note that I am not attempting to portray myself as a victim. I was fully aware of his actions but did not resist. I allowed him to lead me to the dance floor, feeling somewhat light-hearted. I was not intoxicated, but I was in a state of consciousness that was borderline inebriated. The music and the atmosphere played a role in my behavior, and I simply went with the flow. I cannot identify whether it was Brandon's polished appearance, confidence, or a combination of factors that drew me to him. We danced and shared drinks, and that was the extent of it before things took a wild turn. It all began with a kiss, and I cannot explain how it escalated into something so intense. The kiss was the initial catalyst for an intense and unanticipated series of events. It is important to clarify that I did not intend for the situation to progress in such a manner. However, I cannot deny that I indirectly encouraged Brandon's actions. I recognize that I provided him with the cues to continue, and I am acutely aware of the guilt I feel for allowing Brandon to cross numerous boundaries. The following morning, I woke up in an unfamiliar location with Brandon. The reality of my actions then became apparent to me. I had spent the night with Brandon, a complete stranger whom I had never encountered before. I practically rushed out of the hotel room, overwhelmed with shame. I was disconcerted to realize that I had betrayed my husband with an absolute stranger. This was particularly troubling given that I had no prior connection to Brandon before leaving the hotel. He provided me with a business card, which included his contact details. He expressed satisfaction with our night together and interest in seeing me again. I only agreed to take the business card after he demonstrated the use of protection, due to my concerns regarding this matter. It was through this business card that I learned Brandon was an athlete, prompting me to conduct online research. He was revealed to be a young athlete in his mid-20s. Brandon was in his 20s, which astonished me, as I had been intimate with someone 6 years my junior. It seemed unreal, and I struggled to understand my own actions. However, I was aware that it was not the result of external influence, it was a consequence of my own decisions prior to the bachelor party. I had been eagerly anticipating the event. I was compelled to leave Chicago, yet immediately following the party, I found myself fervently praying for time to stand still until I could muster the courage to confront my husband. Time is of the essence, and I am no exception to that rule. It is challenging for me to articulate the full extent of my experience, but I am now facing the consequences. The consequences of my actions have resulted in a profound sense of guilt that I have never before experienced. It is a feeling that is truly overwhelming. I previously believed that it was typically the couples who made unwise decisions at bachelor parties. However, in this instance, I found myself in the position of making the reckless choice. I betrayed my husband in a way that I had not anticipated. I am profoundly disillusioned with myself for engaging in an illicit relationship with a young athlete. I was notably absent on the wedding day and did not capture as many videos as I usually would. Instead, I retreated into my own shell, attempting to conceal my indiscretions while inwardly acknowledging their gravity. The wedding concluded a week ago, yet I remain in Chicago. I currently lack the courage to leave. My husband has been persistently calling me over the past few days, but I have deliberately ignored all his calls. I am unable to bring myself to do it. How can I break the news to him? Nevertheless, I am compelled to return tomorrow. I require your assistance, colleagues. I am in a quandary and uncertain of the optimal course of action. To be candid, I am reluctant for him to become aware of the truth. I still hold feelings for him and deeply regret my actions. The prospect of losing him is intolerable. I recognize that my actions were misguided and that I am acting in a self-serving manner. However, I am seeking guidance and support in navigating this challenging situation. Update: I have been discovered by Dan, who has uncovered the truth on his own. I had hoped that time would somehow alleviate my troubles, but it seems that time has only exacerbated them. While it is commonly believed that time heals wounds, in my case, the situation has only served to exacerbate the initial issue. Paradoxically, the issue itself was not even mine to begin with. My own actions, which could be described as reckless and foolish, ultimately led to the destruction of my marriage. Despite my initial desire to remain in Chicago indefinitely, I was forced to return home at some point. This required a significant degree of personal reflection and introspection. I was motivated to muster the courage to confront my circumstances. The financial burden of renting a hotel in Chicago was considerable, serving as a stark reminder of the necessity to return home. I was relieved to discover that my husband was absent on another business trip, having departed a day before my arrival. This afforded me a period of respite, during which I could collect my thoughts and contemplate my subsequent actions. I was in a state of denial, attempting to prolong the illusion and evade the consequences of my actions. However, I soon recognized that this was an ineffective strategy. Furthermore, these comments only served to exacerbate the situation. Upon reading the majority of the comments, I ceased my perusal, recognizing that they were having a more detrimental effect on me than a constructive one. Some individuals made disparaging remarks, and I must acknowledge that they affected me. What is particularly distressing is that I recognize I have invited such criticism and judgment. Disclosing my experience on Reddit and subjecting myself to public scrutiny and criticism is a novel experience for me, and I sincerely hope it will be the last. I recall when I mentioned that my husband was persistently contacting me, and I chose to it is advisable to ignore his calls. He left numerous voice messages, and it was only after I had gathered my thoughts that I finally listened to them. In most of these messages, he sounded visibly upset, repeatedly expressing his frustration with my mysterious behavior of not answering his calls or responding to his texts. However, it was the last voice message that truly revealed the depth of his anger. His tone was furious, and he even threatened to travel to Chicago if I did not return his call. Initially, I brushed off his threat, assuming it was just an empty one that he would not follow. By the time I listened to the final message, I was already outside of Chicago. Fortunately, he also mentioned that he had to go to work, which prevented him from carrying out his threat. After reading many of the comments on Reddit, I finally decided to come clean with my husband. The comments made me realize that withholding the truth from him would only brand me as a selfish, deceitful person, and I had to take responsibility for my actions. I will not claim that I decided to tell the truth solely due to external pressure. It took a great deal of a process of introspection and consideration of alternative perspectives led me to recognize that my decision to cheat on my husband and subsequently conceal the truth from him was self-centered and unacceptable. As many individuals have rightly observed in the comments, I acknowledged that I had behaved in an entitled manner, which was inappropriate. While infidelity is a significant issue, attempting to hide the truth only exacerbates the situation when this matter is eventually revealed. I do not want my husband to develop a negative perception of me. One of the contributing factors to this outcome was ultimately the persistent messages from the athlete led me to confess the truth. It appeared that he had obtained my phone number through the groom, who happened to be his distant cousin. When I inquired about how he got my number, he confessed to deceiving the groom by pretending to hire me for an event. I subsequently identified the source and promptly blocked him. However, he continued to reach out using different numbers. I eventually resorted to completely turning off my phone and using a different one with a separate SIM card, as I grew weary of his incessant calls. Each time he attempted to contact me, it served as a painful reminder of my actions. It served as a painful reminder of my misdeeds. He had become a welcome presence that I found difficult to dislodge. After switching my phone back on, I observed that he had ceased texting and calling me. At this juncture, I elected to delete all the call logs and text messages he had sent, thus enabling me to utilize my original SIM card once more. My husband returned from his work trip after just 1 week. Upon his immediate return, he requested a serious conversation with me. I was taken aback and filled with anxiety, convinced that he had somehow discovered the truth. However, the conversation did not unfold as I had anticipated. He was visibly angry and he persistently inquired as to the rationale behind my conduct in Chicago. Despite the opportune moment to divulge the truth, I was unable to muster the courage to do so. Instead, I offered an apology and informed him that I had fallen ill in Chicago. However, he remained unconvinced and insinuated he expressed his disbelief that I had deliberately ignored him, and his anger was palpable throughout the day. I sought refuge in the bathroom and sobbed uncontrollably. I questioned myself as to whether his anger was justified by my actions. I ceased communication with him for approximately 7 days. I was uncertain as to how he would react upon learning of my misdeed. I came to recognize that I may have underestimated the gravity of my actions. I came to accept that forgiveness was unlikely and began to process this harsh reality, despite my initial expectations. Up to this point, I had not anticipated the moment he would uncover the truth. I had not considered the possibility that he might discover it on his own. In fact, I was utterly unprepared for the shock and anxiety that overwhelmed me when he confronted me. I had not adequately prepared for this situation. My regret for not confessing sooner intensified. The incident occurred on a Saturday morning when both of us were at home, an unusual occurrence given our busy schedules. My husband's anger still lingered, and we hadn't exchanged a word for quite some time. I prepared lunch for us and served him in the living room. I observed him watching television. I had not foreseen his abrupt and forceful action of pushing the plate until it shattered on the floor, spilling the scalding hot food in close proximity to my skin. I was so taken aback that I nearly stepped on the broken shards as I became visibly upset and questioned his immature behavior. It was rather foolish of me to I was prepared to reprimand him, but I was unaware that I was about to receive a startling revelation. He retrieved his phone, increased the brightness, and handed it to me, forcing me to squint to discern what he wanted to show me. My breath caught in my throat as the screen displayed screenshots of text messages from Brandon. The dates on these messages indicated that they were recent, leaving me astonished that D&E had managed to capture texts I was unaware of. Despite his profession as a journalist, I had underestimated my husband's intelligence, a momentary lapse in judgment amidst my personal turmoil. The messages were so fresh that I was certain that the messages were not the same ones that I had deleted. It then became apparent that my husband had accessed my phone without my knowledge in order to obtain these incriminating texts. Among the messages were words that I am unable to recount in full, but one of them read, "I can't forget that night, even though I've tried. Please stop." I was overcome with embarrassment at the thought of my husband reading those appalling messages. Brandon had faded from my thoughts as he'd stopped sending me messages. I neglected to check my phone, preoccupied with finding the courage to confess the truth to my husband. I was unaware that this was a possibility. To delete the texts, in fact, I was unaware of their existence when DNE presented the messages. I was so taken aback that I was unable to move. I was fixated on my phone, as if it held the key to salvation from the predicament I had created. DNE shook his head and expressed his disappointment, spitting on the floor in disdain. He accused me of callously discarding his trust, lamenting how women like me erode the trust husbands have for their wives. He expressed his remorse, but also his regret that he would never be able to trust me again. His words stung, forcing me to cover my ears in an attempt to shield myself from his harsh critique. As I listened, I recognized the extent of my misstep, realizing that the man who had once held me in high regard was now repulsed by everything associated with me. His cutting words left me deeply ashamed. He further chastised me for concealing the truth for weeks, despite my attempts to explain my words, which were stumbling and incoherent. He then abruptly departed, without allowing me the opportunity to speak. I spent hours on the floor, reflecting on the events, even pinching myself in an attempt to awaken from what felt like a nightmarish reality. I had recklessly jeopardized my life in a brief encounter with a stranger. The encounter with a stranger and the consequences experienced and ongoing were beyond anything I could have imagined. The abrupt end of my marriage due to my own choices was almost inconceivable. Each day since that fateful moment has been filled with unbearable misery. It is difficult to comprehend what must be going through the mind of the individual in question. His mind now realizes that my former husband, who previously expressed affection towards me, now regards me with disdain and ignores my calls. This realization is a haunting torment. I remain in a state of shock, struggling even as I write this to muster the strength to leave the confines of my home after days of isolation. The sole text message from DNE indicated his intention to pursue a divorce. He advised me to sign the divorce papers without delay and without causing a scene, as he threatened to humiliate me further. I am reluctant to underestimate his determination to follow through on his words, and therefore I will refrain from resisting or complicating the process. The divorce process is one that I am unable to engage in a malevolent manner, given the circumstances. I have now been granted a divorce. Life has proven to be an unpredictable force, as I am a woman who was married just 4 months ago, yet I find myself divorced in an astonishingly short span of time. Life has a remarkable way of bringing about unexpected changes. A method of disillusioning one's expectations and leaving one uncertain of the appropriate course of action. A process of recovery from the effects of misfortune. I experienced a significant impact from the consequences of my actions, and Dan's actions contributed to the reversal of my decisions. For those interested in the details of the past 4 months, I will provide an account of what has transpired. I am eager to share this information because I have been intending to make this post for some time. I signed the divorce papers without any theatrics, recognizing that there was no point in prolonging the process or attempting to outsmart the inevitable. We were residing in a rented apartment and did not own a house. There were no disputes over property. With regard to property and other matters, I am also grateful that we had not yet started a family, as the separation would otherwise have been much more painful. I relocated from the apartment because I was unable to afford it on my own, despite Dan's decision to leave. I returned to my aunt's house, where I had been living before getting. My aunt has been a maternal figure to me throughout my life, although I must admit that she was not pleased with my decision to end my marriage. Despite the lack of veracity in the accounts provided by my neighbors and acquaintances, I saw no point in refuting or altering their versions of events. Some accounts may be exaggerated, but I did not have the energy to address each individual's perception of the situation. Furthermore, I acknowledge that the individuals in question are not lying. I recognize that I am responsible for my actions and that I brought this situation upon myself. Had I remained faithful to my husband and not sought companionship elsewhere, I would not have endured the embarrassment and ridicule that I have experienced. Some individuals even label me as damaged goods as a result of my actions. The assumption is that I am not paying attention, but nevertheless, none of these judgments affected me as profoundly as the realization of my own actions. I live with regret every single day, and I am uncertain if the stigma will ever dissipate. It seems like the entire neighborhood is well acquainted with the full story, and I doubt any. It is evident that the rumor mill is in full swing, as any man entering the area is bound to hear the whispers and gossip. My aunt has often cautioned me that these rumors might prove to be a significant obstacle in my path to marriage. It has now been 4 months since I have acknowledged my mistake and moved on from it. I have spent a considerable amount of time dwelling on the past and feeling sorry for myself. However, I have come to realize that dwelling on the past is unproductive and hinders progress. It is futile to dwell on past regrets and replay the past. Dan has moved forward with his life, and I deserve the same opportunity. I have a career to return to, and I must embrace the opportunities that have been coming my way. I have learned a valuable lesson from this experience, but it does not mean I should linger. In the past, I have informed my aunt that I intend to stay with her for just 2 more months before relocating to New York. I have saved sufficient funds to establish a dance studio and an office to facilitate my client interactions. I have tuned out all background chatter, even when my aunt and other family members attempt to engage me in conversation. Please provide me with updates regarding my former partner's activities. I have consistently informed them that I am not interested in revisiting those memories. That is the extent of my involvement. Currently, I am working on securing a place in New York before my move. Brandon ceased contacting me 2 months before the divorce was finalized. Since that time, I have been able to achieve a sense of inner peace. It is my sincere hope that others will not make the same poor decisions that I did. Women should be more mindful and consider the potential consequences of their actions before engaging with anyone of the opposite gender. It is important to remember to stay safe at bachelor parties.